Let me be direct with you from the outset. What we are witnessing in the Persian Gulf is not the standard diplomatic posturing that the mainstream media is feeding you. It is not a temporary escalation that will fade after a few sternly worded statements from the White House. What we are witnessing is the quiet final collapse of a maritime security architecture that has held for 40 years. I am looking at a series of intelligence reports and satellite imagery that have been circulating among senior regional military analysts for the past 72 hours, and I need you to look at this with me because what it shows is not a standard fleet of American aircraft carriers on routine patrol. It is not a predictable missile battery buildup. It is not merely the expected drone swarm deterrent we have seen in previous cycles. What it shows is a highly sophisticated, dispersed striking fleet now locking into position, and a calculated, desperate shift in American policy that ignores every tactical reality on the ground. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this maneuver from the new administration is doomed to failure, why the strategic math has fundamentally shifted, and why this is not just a military story, it is a story of global energy markets and national survival. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is an analysis you are not going to get from CNN, MSNBC, or the legacy networks. This is not speculation. This is the reality of the situation unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz right now. Let's start with the geography, because that is where the experts always fail. People look at a map of the Strait of Hormuz and they see a narrow stretch of water. They don't understand the depth, the acoustics, or the reality of operating in a space where, at its narrowest point, the shipping channel is barely 3 kilometers wide. To put that in perspective, a modern American destroyer is roughly 150 to 170 meters long. When you are operating in such tight, shallow, and acoustically dense waters, the traditional doctrine of power projection becomes a liability, not an asset. This means that any reliance on large deck aircraft carriers or massive surface combatants is, frankly, an invitation to a disaster that most American planners are still refusing to publicly acknowledge. According to recent assessments from maritime defense journals, the environmental conditions in the strait, specifically the salinity and temperature gradients, create an acoustic nightmare for American sonar operators. Defense Security Asia has reported that these conditions make tracking low-signature diesel-electric submarines nearly impossible. As one retired U.S. Navy commander stated, and I am quoting him directly here, "We are operating in a domain where our sensors are essentially blind against a competent asymmetric adversary." I can subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now let's talk about the specific announcements that are currently defining this crisis. Announcement number one, the deployment of the updated Iranian deep-water patrol vessels. And this one matters more than anything else happening in this theater right now. These are not merely defensive platforms. They are optimized for what military planners call anti-access area denial operations. They carry a payload capacity that contradicts the defensive framing the West insists on using. Specifically, their integrated torpedo tubes are configured for high-velocity, wake-homing munitions that are specifically designed to negate the defensive screens of much larger surface ships. According to reporting by regional defense analysts and confirmed by multiple signals intelligence intercepts, these platforms are now capable of remaining submerged in littoral zones for periods exceeding what was previously estimated. Bloomberg has reported that the administration is aware of these upgraded capabilities, yet they continue to push a public narrative of deterrence through presence. And that is a dangerous disconnect. The math is simple. Iran currently operates a sufficient number of these units to create a permanent, non-negotiable blockade threat across the shipping lanes. The administration's refusal to acknowledge this is not just poor politics, it is professional malpractice. Received. That is announcement number one. Announcement number two, and this is the complication that most pundits are missing, the mines. We aren't talking about World War II era floating contact mines. We are talking about intelligent, sensor-fused influence mines currently being staged. This is the part the Pentagon has confirmed, albeit quietly, in recent briefing memos. When you combine the submarine threat with the reality of advanced, programmable sea mines, you are looking at a maritime environment that is effectively closed to traditional naval transit. It is not just a minor supply chain disruption, it is a fundamental shift in the global energy cost structure. And when you understand that 98% of the region's oil exports are essentially tied to these specific transit routes, it becomes a critical, system-wide risk. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the implications for your own household costs become impossible to ignore. Announcement number three, the Trump administration's response. They have shifted to what they call an extreme engagement strategy involving massive air power escalation. But here is the problem. You cannot strike what you cannot see, and you cannot deter a force that has already moved past the need for conventional naval survival. The administration's strategy is built on the assumption that Iran cares about losing hardware. The reality is that they have shifted to a dispersed, decentralized model where the loss of any single unit is irrelevant to the overall strategic effect. They are playing a game of attrition that the United States, with its expensive, irreplaceable hardware, cannot afford to win. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. While the media focuses on the movement of aircraft carriers and the aggressive tone of the latest White House press release, they are ignoring the diplomatic maneuvering in Beijing. When the United States conducts a massive military operation, and its primary partners in the region not only refuse to provide basing access, but are actively organizing an alternative diplomatic framework to bypass American influence, that is not ambiguity. That is not diplomatic nuance. That is a verdict. It is a sign that the current American foreign policy framework is effectively dead. Think carefully about what this represents. The administration responded to these diplomatic slights by doubling down on threats, effectively isolating themselves further. This has not notably changed the position of the regional powers. It has only made them more determined to find an alternative that does not involve Washington. If you own a vehicle, rely on freight-delivered goods, or pay for energy to heat your home, what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz is not a distant foreign policy story. It is a personal cost of living story. The disruption of these lanes is already being priced into the markets. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Look at the Soviet experience in Afghanistan in the 1980s. A superpower, convinced of its own technological and organizational superiority, committed itself to a conflict against an asymmetric, locally entrenched enemy. They poured in resources, they escalated the intensity, and they ignored the local realities of the terrain. The result was not victory, it was a total exhaustion of resources and a long-term erosion of the superpower's status. The parallel is exact. The current American strategy in the Strait is the maritime equivalent of the Soviet quagmire, a reliance on expensive heavy power projection in an environment where speed, stealth, and asymmetry are the only variables that actually matter. So where does this leave us? Let me give you two clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1. The administration realizes the futility of this escalation, pulls back the surface fleet, and seeks a face-saving, China-mediated regional security arrangement. This would require an immediate cessation of the current hostile rhetoric and a pivot toward diplomatic compromise. However, given the current political climate in Washington, the likelihood of this assessment being accepted is low. Path 2. The administration continues to escalate, leading to a direct kinetic confrontation in the Strait. The consequences would be an immediate catastrophic spike in global energy prices and a long-term closure of the most vital shipping lane in the world. This is the path we are currently on, and it is the one that most headlines are failing to quantify. I think we are closer to path 2 than the headlines suggest. The momentum of the current administration's policy is essentially locked in, and the military apparatus is now too deep into its deployment cycle to easily withdraw. But here is the caveat. Even if they don't want a war, they have created a situation where one could be triggered by a single miscalculation by a junior officer on a patrol boat. Here are the questions I want you to take away. Who actually benefits if the Strait of Hormuz is closed? Is the American public prepared for the economic fallout of a protracted energy crisis? And why is the mainstream media so focused on the military movements but so silent on the diplomatic shifts? Tell me in the comments what you think the administration does next. Tell me if you think we are on path 1 or path 2 and why you believe that. We will keep tracking every development in this theater because that is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand why the world feels like it is on the edge. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.